Well, it's great to see everybody and a lot of old friends. I think of myself as a Chicagoan on assignment. My wife and I are empty nesters. We're having a wonderful time. And actually, we live in Mountain View. Does anyone know what Mountain View is famous for? It's actually a big city.
Viewing a mountain?
No. It's not about viewing a mountain. It's 72,000 people. It's the home of Google. I'm a half a mile from Google. And actually, I went to an education conference at Google my first week in town. And Eric Canada, some of you know Eric. He's the guy who's doing the Harlem Children's Zone. Awesome speaker. He's keynoting in the evening. And, we've seen a few Googlers around, some of the big guys, Eric Schmidt and stuff. But right before Canada starts to speak, this little guy rollerblades in jeans, sits down right in the front row, watches Canada, and someone turns to me and says, "That's Sergey Brin. This is the guy who thought up Google." And after Canada was done, he rollerblades out. Never said a word. Very strange. Anyway, it's a strange, and I said, now I am in Northern California, A billionaire just rollerbladed into my life. So listen, I'm going to talk a little bit. I'll tell you why I went to Carnegie. I went to work with Tony Brike, and those of you who've been around Chicago school reform know what a brilliant contributor he was when he was here at the University of Chicago. This is arguably one of the top researchers in K-12 education. He was made the head of Carnegie a year ago. He'd been teaching at Stanford, which interestingly he didn't enjoy all that much. He liked Chicago much more because he was much more engaged in the schools. When he was here, he created this brilliant organization called the Consortium on Chicago School Research. And those of you who worked with the consortium know that their whole idea was to try to make education usable, job-embedded, relevant, educational research, job-embedded, relevant, useful to teachers on the ground. Tony and I are going to try to do the same thing nationally. We're trying to think about how education research, stripped away from the craziness of the universities and all of those bad ways that they proceed to go off on their various ideas, is to use educational research practically. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But I also want to talk about, Brike just published an amazing book through U of C Press, which summarizes his work in Chicago, and I think a lot of you folks are working in Chicago. I think there's some very valuable lessons here in Chicago, and I thought I would, kind of summarize a few of those for you quickly, and then I'd love to get to your questions. Anyway, so there I am in Mountain View, and my whole career has been about trying to get business ideas into education appropriately. Okay, I do think business leaders who are good and successful are all about change. These guys who run Google, they're all about change. They are destroying lots of capitalist infrastructure in America as we sit here. I don't know if you're familiar with what exactly Google is, but you all do it, right? Everybody Googles. But this is a company that Microsoft made its first billion in 15 years. These guys made their first billion in 5.5 years. They're running at a level where they are going to book $28 billion this year. They have completely undercut whole industries, including the newspaper industry, and they're undoing advertising. And they're killing advertising agencies. Not a bad thing. They're pretty obnoxious, advertising agencies, if you've ever worked on them. Here's what they do. They sell ads that accompany your search. And when you click on those ads, then they pay. Right? So none of the advertising is lost. They know exactly who clicks on that ad and how long they stay on your site. And this has completely revolutionized the sale of advertising. They are feared and loved. They're the biggest company that is still loved in America. Nobody ever loved the cable companies. Nobody ever loved Microsoft, right? These guys have done something quite amazing. So, some of you know me as a charter advocate, somebody who thinks a lot about charters. And I just wanted to read from Page and Brin. Someone asked them how they got such clarity about what they were going to do in terms of search. because they revolutionized search. And Page says, being less experienced, because they figured this out when they were students at Stanford. Do you understand that? They said, being less experienced, you have benefits and you have costs. We were willing to do things differently because we didn't know better. I think our propensity to do that is higher than most people's. I'm not sure it's clarity. It looks like clarity in retrospect because you see the things that work. And basically, Bryn goes on with a parallel answer. A lot of common sense, a combination of common sense and questioning rituals. Experience is a benefit, but it can also be a handicap. So basically, one of the things that drew me to charter schools was the greenfield opportunity to rethink schools free of all the constraints. And it's kind of like this engineering optimization thinking that these guys do, which is, yeah, we don't know, but let's do something that makes sense for kids. So Bill and I were lucky enough to work on helping prospective schools start. And actually, they thought that school up in Bill's house in Hyde Park. And this is now a charter and a great charter organization. And they absolutely rethought the middle school, top to bottom, and kind of put kids in charge of big pieces of the culture building in that school. And as a result, the original one was a brilliant school. They now have 5 schools. They're not all brilliant. They've had problems, right? And this is what I was saying to people earlier is, one of the things that Bright talks a lot about is any intervention that you attempt in something as complex as schools, you're going to have a range of results. And the question is, do you learn from that evidence and do you do something with it? So my dad, I want to talk about our dad and quickly. My dad said to me when I was going off to college, we got talking about change, and he said to me, business people are the best change agents there are. And this is in like 1968 or 69, and I'm like, Dad, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard, right? This is the middle of the civil rights era, and the riots are going on, and I'm fighting against the war in Vietnam in my own way. Bill's fighting in his own way. And the world is in flames, and we're all up in arms. And my dad is saying that these business guys are the change agents. And I just thought that was ridiculous. And it reminds me of what Mark Twain said, which was, when I was 17, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 30, I was astonished to see how much the old guy had learned in 13 years. My father was absolutely right. Businessmen were politically conservative, but the ones that were successful, the ones that were ahead of the curve, that were really thinking, they were changing their organizations all the time. And they were rethinking the world every day because the market, and I'm now no worshiper of the market, but the market is relentless. And if you aren't moving, you're going to get rolled over by this market. And so I tried to use that idea as I was at the Kellogg School of Management to figure out how business could contribute to the school reform in Chicago. And I did a lot of stuff, leadership training for principals, hiring people differently into the principalship, actually going out and getting people from outside of Chicago. We have kind of a tradition here, don't send nobody sent into the big political jobs. And I actually went to Racine, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee, and Iowa, and recruited excellent principals to come to Chicago. Did a lot of things that business people do, and I think helped make a difference in Chicago. And I also was the chairman of the consortium on Chicago School Research Steering Committee, so that's where I got to know Tony Bright. Well, let me just make just a couple of comments, and then I'd like Bill to talk. I talk from an organizational frame. I'm a policy wonk. I'm not a teacher, and in fact, I've never taught. But I think that Chicago, out of its 1988 reform, has done some remarkable things, and I think the consortium has itself captured what it takes to change a school. And I just want to talk about these 5 elements real quickly of what it takes to have an excellent school, because all of these elements I see in great schools, whether they're charter or whether they're district schools. You remember when the war room was going on for the Clinton campaign and somebody put up the sign, "It's the economy, stupid"? many of us in reform were working on these structural elements, and somebody put up a sign at my office that says, "It's about instruction, stupid." And I do think that people like me, policy wonks like me, somewhat grudgingly came to what Bill had been telling me for a long time, is that it is the academic content, the intellectual demand we put on kids, the kind of work we ask kids to do, the pedagogies, the repertoire, the instructional tools that we use to engage kids, and it's the moral space that is a great classroom. So, but one of the things I've come to realize, and I'm not sure that Bill agrees with me on this, we could unpack it a little bit, is that schools are the unit of change, and they need coherence in the curriculum and in the instructional approach. Now, that doesn't mean that every school need be the same, and that's one of the beauties of the democratic localism that was Chicago school reform and still is. You can go in a lot of different directions. KIPP might be described as a back-to-basic charter school, and Perspectives is a very, very powerful progressive school, not unlike your school. And each is fine, but let's all work together in this building to do it this way. I don't care which song you're singing, but let's sing in harmony, okay? So I think an instructional guidance system, I've come to believe, is really key. That you have content and pacing and depth to the instruction, and the learning tasks are deep and hard and challenging to kids. And the strategies and materials and tools are top-notch stuff, all right? So instruction, numero uno. Professional capacity. That means both hiring good people and strengthening the people you have. And we were talking about Michelle Rhee earlier. You might have to ask people to leave your school. That can be done in 100 different ways. It's not always about firing teachers the way our friend Arnie is talking about it right now. But professional capacity is number two. Number three is parent-community engagement. You cannot do schools that are going to work and sustain improvement if you aren't engaged in a community. That means both making them a welcoming place for people to be and one that honors the traditions of that neighborhood or that town and draws on other great organizations there, right? And works with other organizations. You know, so often urban schools are little islands that don't relate. And I see Vicki Gunther here. She did so much on the west side when she engaged that community in the brilliant school that she built at Jackson. Fourth, student-centered learning climate. The way that kids feel, the safety and the way we engage kids, the way we show respect for kids in classrooms is crucial because they have incredible radar on whether they're being respected and whether there's high expectations for their learning and whether they're safe and whether, you know, and Bill talks a lot about this and I'll ask him to talk more about it. But if you don't have a student-centered space, you're not going to get it done. And finally is leadership. And there's several different kinds of leadership, and we could talk about it. We could unpack some of those, but you know, there's the kind of the managerial stuff that has to be good, in fact, you know, that meetings happen on time and making stuff work and the dollars are honest and forthright. But everyone has been focusing in recent years on instruction, right? That the leader of the school has to be effective, whether it's the principal or not, has to be effective in providing formative feedback to teachers and setting high standards for learning in the school. And they also need to be inclusive and facilitative. And by that I mean they need to be seeing other leaders and pushing power out. Some of the Ann Hines this year and Vicki, you know, they always had great people that they were giving power away to. They would always say, if I give power away, I get more back, you know. But giving it appropriately to teachers and to teacher leaders and others. So, and they're always saying things like, Vicki was always saying, very much a sense of forward movement, like, look how much we've done, right? You know, we can do even more, you know, kind of this positive, let's go, you know. to get buy-in for teachers from change, you cannot do what our friend Michelle Rhee is doing, which is just ragging on people and expect that they're going to follow you. You know, you really have to build a culture of success. So a friend of mine, John Katsakis, when we were developing these 5 ideas, and I'm going to end on this, he said, he made the analogy, analogies are always good, that getting it right in a school is like baking a cake. You know, you need the appropriate mix of flour, sugar, eggs, oil, baking powder, flavoring. You need all that. And in these 5 things, these 5 essential supports that I just laid out for you, you need them all. You can't do it without any of them, which underscores the complexity of what you are doing in schools. You need them all. And you need them in appropriate mixes. But, you know, if you don't have sugar, it'll be tasteless. And if you don't have eggs and baking powder, it'll be flat, right? You need all these things. But what John said was the heat of the oven that bakes this cake is trust. And what did he mean by that? He meant that in the building, people trust one another. The adults believe that the purpose of the place is improving student achievement, and kids are loved and respected. And this notion of organizational trust is the one thing that Tony Breik found consistently in all of his research, 20 years here in Chicago looking at school change. He had a battery of 22 questions in his surveys for teachers, and he could predict student achievement going up at about a 95% rate. He could predict it based on trust. And the questions were things like, is the teacher about improving instruction? Do you get support when you try new things? Are your colleagues helpful to you? Do you get visits in your classroom? All these elements are about trust. And I worry about this current scorched earth, notion that Arnie is pushing and that Michelle Rhee is, that it's all about bad teachers. It is not about bad teachers. It's about all the excellent teachers and all the okay teachers that could be excellent. And the way you do that is by building trustful cultures inside of schools. Some call it professional community. I see Penny's here and that is doing a lot of work in professional community, and I think it's really, really crucial. So it's those 5 things, orchestrated by a great leader, could be the principal, could be others. I'll just mention 2 other things that I want to hear from Bill. This technical core on teaching and learning is key, and in tandem, building these trustful relationships. That's what your job is as school administrators and as teachers, to try to build those kind of cultures. But there are structural features that do help a lot, and there's 2 of them. One is small schools, and despite the Gates people throwing up their hands and saying small schools don't work, which was the stupidest thing I ever saw, they really do work. And in fact, it's one of the things I like about the charter movement. Most of the schools are about 60% the size of a typical school. So in the charter world, the average elementary school is about 380 kids. Average high school is about 600. I think that's about right. You can make the economics work many times at those numbers. I would try to never go higher than that. Now, we could talk about problems related to that, but small schools make a huge difference in building this trust because people know each other and kids are known, okay? Second thing, stability. The mobility in urban schools kills us. Kids moving in and out, often related to low-income relationships with landlords and stuff. I always said to principals, cheat on that. Tell your parents they can stay in the school even though they move 6 blocks away. Why not? I used to say to Arnie and to Paul Vallis, this is the stupidest rule in the world. The research is totally clear. If kids stay at school and they have a stable environment and they know their teacher and they know their next year's teacher, they do well. But instead, when they move 6 blocks away because they can't pay the rent and they get thrown out, of their apartment, they go to the other school. Now, many times it's because they're in a weak school and they figure the next one can't be as bad as this. But really, we have to end the mobility. We have to battle the mobility of low-income families and get that stability in school, get small schools, and then get schools where relational trust is the norm. So that's my take. I worked here for 23 years. I love Chicago. I'm a Chicagoan on assignment. I will be back.
Like General, I got this one. So, where to intervene, where to disagree, where to take this up? I agree with a lot of what John said, but I have a very different frame. So maybe I'll start by reframing a little bit. When you say, for example, let's look at what works, I immediately want to kind of expand the frame and ask, what are we talking about from an ethical or intellectual point of view? What works, which was the title of the piece that was written under the Reagan administration about school reform. I'm not sure that it's always in our interest to just focus on that. Nicholas Kristof wrote a piece in the New York Times about how bad schools are. This is, as you know, a regular feature of journalism is just to beat up on teachers in schools. But Kristof made the point that we're so far behind that only the white suburban schools are on the level of Singapore. Singapore? Is that actually what is that what we want? It works. I'm reminded of Robert Oppenheimer when the successful explosion of the first nuclear bomb, and his first words were, "It works." Great, except why? And should it? And do we really want it? So to compare us to Singapore, which is much more like 1984 than it is like Thomas Jefferson, strikes me as a little bit frightening. So that's where I want to start. But maybe even before that, I'll start in the classroom. When I began teaching in 1965, I was in the first 15 minutes of my first classroom, and a 5-year-old kid said to me, "Why does the ball bounce?" And I thought, oh shit, I don't even know that. I'm a teacher for 15 minutes, and I'm stumped. He's already got me. Why does the ball bounce? By the end of that first morning, I didn't know why the sky was blue. I didn't know why the man was sleeping on the curb on our walk to the park in New York City. I didn't know why my skin was pink and her skin was brown. I seemed to not know any. Oh, I did know why the floor was sticky when they spilled apple juice. I was so thrilled to know something. I was 20 years old. I didn't know much, and I went into a tailspin and a crisis as a teacher. But it was a productive crisis because a year or two later, I came out of it with a different idea of what teaching is. We are so invested in the idea that teaching is standing at the podium, master and commander of everything before you, doling out the information and the skills. And that is the model of teaching that we actually are already talking about. I reject it. It's not my model of teaching. It's not what good teaching looks like. It's not at all what we should be promoting. And yet, we've drunk the Kool-Aid on that idea, even though many of us know secretly that it's not true. Still, we can't have a conversation without admitting that standing in front of the room and having great lesson plans and being able to evaluate the kids, that's teaching. Nonsense. I want to challenge it. I want to have a fight about it. I want to argue about it. And I want to illustrate why I think that's nonsense, and I will try to. Similarly, educational research. I teach it. I know it's kind of a confession. I'm sorry. I teach it. I am a huge skeptic of educational research. It's employed in all the worst and stupidest ways, and you can be sure, and those of you who work in schools know this to be true, if somebody says, the research says, you know that they're advocating for something that, whether it's true or not, that's their big stick. They expect to silence you with that. The research says, oh, well, shit, I can't, what am I going to say? The research already spoke. I'm just an idiot here in a classroom. No, the research speaks with 1,000 voices, many of them forked. And so be careful about what the research says. And similarly, when you hear somebody say, and some of you have said it, but there's no research that said, be careful. Be careful. So I said to a guy, I was advocating with a group of young people about bringing in a spoken word curriculum into a high school in Chicago. And the principal said to us in deep, stentorious tones, he said, but there's no research that says that hip-hop or spoken word will improve reading scores. And I said, where's the research that says reading Romeo and Juliet will improve reading scores? He said, don't be silly. Okay, got it. So Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, we're just going to do that. in the freshman, that doesn't need any research. We're going to do that anyway because we want to. But you've got to come forward with research if you want to change that. So there's no research, there's research. Be skeptical. And I urge you to be a skeptic in all of these conversations that we're caught up in and learn to be an organized, thoughtful, persuasive skeptic. So I teach in the AUSL program. Some of you are AUSL. I have taught in Teach for America. Some of you are Teach for America. I've worked with KIPP schools. Some of you are KIPP schools. And I am a skeptic about every one of them. The people, tremendous. The people who are motivated to do these things, fantastic. The ideology, not so much. Be careful when you buy the program. And I think you said as much, John. There's no silver bullet. Keep working. You can be a better teacher if you're a teacher. You can be a better principal. You can improve something in this corner of this room, of this school today if you want to. If you are wise enough and collaborative enough and so on, you can do it. So I'm not wanting to discourage you, but I do want to discourage you from genuflecting in front of any of these reform ideas. They're all mixed bags. They're all complex. They're all dealing with and one of the other dead giveaways on this is that if I say here's the way to change the schools, I'm able to have a serious discussion because I've asserted something that everybody thinks is a kind of bounded, piece of something called school improvement. And everyone has an opinion, not just Nicholas Kristof and David Brooks. Everyone, your mama has an opinion about how to improve the schools. Everybody's an expert, right? If I say, here's how you change society, here's how you make a progressive society, shoot me. You jump off a bridge. Nobody knows. It's complicated. It's messy. And we know much more about what doesn't work than we know about what does work. That's true of schools. Changing schools is no more nor less complicated than changing the world. So don't let people suck you into a conversation that says, this is how it's done. Here's the 4 things or whatever it is. Be careful and be skeptical of all of that. So, in terms of changing the frame, for me, I want to get out of the box of saying that there's a simple way of thinking about teaching or a simple metric that will tell us how schools have improved or whether they've improved and so on. And I want to change the frame in the following way. I want to ask the question, what is distinct about teaching in a democracy as opposed to teaching in a monarchy or an authoritarian society, let's just say fascist Italy or Soviet Albania or apartheid South Africa? Is there anything that makes teaching in a democracy different? I'm thinking Singapore, which kind of gives me chills to think that we would want to be Singapore. But nevertheless, is there something that makes teaching in a democracy distinct?
Local control?
Maybe.
Oh,
So,
well, with the democracy, don't you have the freedom to be able to teach what you wish to teach?
well, I mean, should you be able to teach what you wish to teach and the parents don't wish you to teach that? I mean, don't the parents have a voice? A couple other thoughts, throw them out. Process, interaction. Just yell. The assumption that everybody gets to speak. These are all aspects, sure.
I think one of the most important aspects is making sure that we're teaching kids how to think.
Okay, so teaching kids how to think, or sometimes we kind of heroize that and we say, think critically. And whenever we say, here's my critical thinking package, I always think, damn, what would be thinking that wasn't critical? So when we were kids, we didn't learn critical thinking. Thinking was what you can't think without being critical, right? But, it's a package now, we buy it and sell it. Okay, I think these are all aspects, and I would put it this way, that in a democracy, we are powered by a fragile and precious ideal, and that is that every human being is of incalculable value, and that a democracy is a place that rallies the energy of everyone in the spirit of cooperation and forward motion, and that value is critical. And that means that has huge implications for policy. We cannot allow in a democracy a school system in which some kids are going to school on $4,000 per kid per year, and others on 40,000 per kid per year. That's a savage inequality that whatever other role we play, as citizens, as interested people, as parents, as teachers, as administrators, we should fight that every day. That's unfair. It's not worthy of a democracy. And yet, all this focus on the bad teacher somehow misses Washington, D.C. is being starved to death, people. You know, are you kidding me? So the idea, now I've got a great idea. We'll tie the teacher evaluation to test scores. As a friend of mine said when my kids were at lab school and he was teaching at DuSable, let me teach at lab school. I get great evaluations too, because your kids are going to college. Exactly. And let those lab school teachers come over here to DuSable and see how they do. Exactly. So let's not be silly and buy into the idea that all it is if you're some kind of magician without, and John mentions mobility, it's much more than that. If you have kids, and I wonder where some of these policy people are. I could take you to the west side. I could show you a kid who has asthma, who misses 40 days of school a year because he doesn't have basic medical care. What's that about? He lives in a neighborhood where other kids carry guns. What's that about? Are you kidding me? He's moved 6 times in a year because his parents are underemployed and unemployed, and he moves from apartment to apartment. He had a fire in his apartment 1 month and moved in with his aunt, and he changed schools 6 times. Are you telling me that if you were just a better teacher, that kid's test scores are going to improve? Let's get serious about savage inequalities. Let's get serious about the non-school issues that impact the lives of the very kids that all these kind of super concerned people seem to be focused on. And let's just ask ourselves, in a democracy, is it fair that some kids have health care and some don't? You know, I'm looking at Haiti, and we're good people. We all want to help Haiti. Why not? Of course we do, because we see it. Why didn't we see it 2 weeks ago? What were you missing? Why were your eyes closed? What are you not seeing right now that you could see? And when you see it, you'll do something about it, but you're not seeing it because you're willfully closing your eyes to it. Good education in a democracy is eye-opening. It's challenging to the kind of numbness of the status quo. So those are 2 areas that I feel very strongly about. But let's talk about curriculum and teaching. Because in any of the other societies I mentioned, apartheid South Africa, Cuba, Romania, China, in any of those other societies, whatever else you teach obedience and conformity. That's always on the lesson plan. Obedience and conformity. And in a democracy, in a true, vital, vibrant democracy, whatever else you taught, you would also teach initiative, courage, entrepreneurship, creativity, imagination, asking the next question, having a conversation, listening with the possibility of being changed, speaking with the possibility of changing others. If you're not teaching that, you're not teaching in and for democracy. And so I look at the kind of layout of kind of what we call reform, what we call school reform, and I kind of shudder, that reform is always an imposition from the top down. It's always from the top down these days. That's a mistake. It's always an emphasis on rote learning, a top-down model of instruction, never a cooperative or initiated model of instruction, a behaviorist model of motivation, always. So I was just at a school, and I could pull it out, but I won't, and it has an entire chart called the 8th grade bathroom chart. Every kid, every day, every period, how much he uses the bathroom. Would you want to go to school in a place or go to work in a place where they said, here's your bathroom chart, dude? No, I don't want to work in that place. We could get deeper in it. Okay. Reliance on the fill-in-the-bubble kind of idea of standardization. The notion that we have to kill the union. And, importantly, the notion that if you're motivated, you can do it. Look at the trope of every teacher movie you've ever seen. And this is we were talking earlier about the lack of support of some of these reform models. The answer when you say, I'm a new teacher, I'm struggling, I'm having trouble, the response often is, where's your commitment? Aren't you committed? I'm committed. I'm committed already. But I need help. No, you got to have commitment. It's all about commitment. No, it's not. It's about commitment, and it's also about passion, yes, but it's also about support. It's about collegiality. It's about recognition. It's about your own intellectual and ethical standards and freedom and so on. Because if all we do is say, where's your commitment, where's your commitment, what we end up with is people who leave in 2 to 3 years, which is what we have. People, good, young, motivated kids come into teaching, and they're out. So somebody said, and John said too, we need stability. Stability includes teachers who are going to stay, not for 2 years and 3 years, not as tourists through the thing, but as people who are committed to it as a life's work. And that doesn't happen if we beat teachers up, if we de-intellectualize and desensitize the work and say it's all about commitment. Every teacher movie you've seen has those themes of commitment, passion. In fact, you got to have a heart attack for your kids just to prove, that you're, stand and deliver. You must have a heart attack. Or, you must have your wife attacked, as in Blackboard Jungle. Look at every teacher movie from Blackboard Jungle to Teacher Writer's Diary. Oh, Michelle. I knew you were going to say Michelle Pfeiffer because he's seen that movie 5 or 6 times just to see Michelle Pfeiffer. It's so gross. Anyway.
That's a terrible movie, though. It's a terrible movie.
Yeah, but she's easy on the eyes. Okay. My point is, this is all summed up for those of you who don't know. Go to YouTube and type in nice white lady. Do you know it?
Nice white lady.
Go to YouTube and type in nice white lady.
Nice white lady.
It's 3 minutes, and it applies to all of us, white, black, young, old. Nice white lady. It's 3 minutes long. It's from Mad TV, and it opens with a overview of the city and from the air, and then it goes in, and the voiceover, the most dangerous place in America, the urban high school, teachers who are lazy and don't give a damn, parents who are uncommitted and blah, 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 and kids who are out of control. Goes into a classroom, and here are these kids sitting on desks, cleaning their pistols and sharpening their knives, and it says, what curriculum that's watered down and doesn't mean anything, what could possibly help them? And the door creaks open, this woman peeks in and says, hi, I'm Amy Little, I'm here to save you. And, the kids are all like grossed out, and one girl with maximum urban attitude goes up in her face and says, what you know about me, bitch, blah, 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 and tells her life story. And Amy Little is taken aback at first, and then she says, write that down. And soon they're all winning Pulitzer Prizes, and they've given up their weapons. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, because it's just that easy. And the reason you can't do it is you don't have your commitment together and you're inadequate. And I don't buy it for 1 minute. So I want to say, in a democracy, on the policy level, and then I'm going to go quickly to curriculum. In a democracy, on a policy level, what the best and most privileged people want for their kids, that's what we want for our kids. That's all we want. I've said for years, what do they have in Winnetka in the first grade? That's all I want. That's all I want. I don't want more than they have in Winnetka. I want what they have in Winnetka.
Describe how they do reading in Winnetka and how they do reading at the urban school.
Exactly. And it's the difference between drill and kill and content and meaning. But that's just one example. So here's my problem with Washington, D.C. in a word. When the Obamas went to Washington, who doubted that they were going to send those 2 lovely kids to Sidwell Friends School? No one doubted it. All the press speculation, will they go to a public? No, they're not. They're going to Sidwell Friends. Why? That's where everybody goes who's the child of a president. That's where Amy Carter went. That's where everybody goes. Because it's a fantastic school. I have former students teaching there. It's a fantastic school. So I would send my kids to Sidwell Friends too. That's not my problem. That's fine with me that they go there. My problem is, why aren't the Washington, D.C. schools like Sidwell Friends? Why don't they have the same resources? Why don't they have, because to go to Sidwell Friends costs you $30,000 a year.
Not all the senators have their kids in those other schools.
That's my point. Exactly. So that's on a policy level. On a curriculum level, what it means is, as I said, resisting obedience and conformity and encouraging initiative and courage. And the fundamental way one does that is through a curriculum of questioning. Everything can be and must be questions. And I could give you 1,000 examples. I'll give you one. During the Civil Rights Movement in 1963, looking back, it's easy to see the Civil Rights Movement as a thing, a clump that had a certain narrative arc. But in 1963, the movement was in crisis. And a young man named Charlie Cobb was a volunteer with SNCC from Howard University, made a proposal to create freedom schools in the South, in Mississippi. And the proposal wasn't like today, a tome to the to the Education Department or the MacArthur Foundation. It was a one-page piece. And Cobb said in the piece, his intention was to revitalize the Civil Rights Movement. But what he said was, the black children of Mississippi have been denied many things: fully trained teachers, forward-looking curriculum, decent facilities. But the fundamental injury is they've been denied the right to think for themselves about the circumstances of their lives and how they might be changed. Now, if you don't think that was revolutionary in 1963 in Mississippi, note the three great martyrs of Mississippi, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, were freedom school teachers, and they were returning from looking at the arson bombing of a church that contained a freedom school when they were kidnapped and lynched. It was revolutionary. But let's say it again, and let's think Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, Washington, New York, San Francisco. The kids have been denied many things: decent facilities, forward-looking curriculum, fully trained teachers. But the fundamental injury is they've been denied the right to think for themselves about the circumstances of their lives and how they might be otherwise. It led, in Charlie Cobb's case, to a curriculum of questions. Why are we here? What is it we want to accomplish? Why are we in the freedom movement? What do we want to change? What do we want to maintain? For 27 pages, it goes on as questions. And you can find it online. Mississippi Freedom School Curriculum, 1964. Get it. It's a phenomenal model of education in a democracy, education for justice, and it is simply building a school where it's not off bounds to ask a question.